I stood there by his grave, and my hands were empty. It was a strange, almost unbearable feeling, like I'd shown up to an important gathering without an invitation, without a gift, without a single word. All around me, people bustled, like ants, each one carrying something of their own. Some gently laid down bouquets of fresh flowers, their petals still holding the morning chill. Others left small notes, probably scribbled in a hurry, but with such sincerity you could feel it even from a distance. A few held old, yellowed photographs, likely capturing happy moments, shared memories with him, with the man who lay beneath this earth. They weren't ashamed of their grief, their gratitude, their memories. They shared it, and you could see it in their faces, in their gazes, which were filled with sorrow but also with a bright remembrance. And I stood there, with nothing. My palms were empty, and my mind was just as empty, mixed with a sharp, burning shame. I didn't even dare to look at the others, because it felt like every glance from them would be a reproach, every movement a reminder of my emptiness. I felt as if I were invisible, yet at the same time, the most noticeable person there, because my lack of anything was so glaring. I'd walked half across town, checked every flower shop, peered into souvenir stores, even thought about finding some little trinket that might symbolize something, anything. But nothing felt right, nothing resonated, nothing could fill that void I felt inside. And still, I found nothing to put on his grave. I'd walked half across town, and still I found nothing to put on his grave. That feeling of emptiness, it wouldn't let go. It pressed down like a heavy stone on my chest, and it took me back to those times when I myself was, essentially, an empty space, unwanted, unnoticed. My school years, oh, they were a real test for everyone who had to deal with me. I was a disobedient student, a real problem kid, as they used to say back then. Constant notes in my report card, calls to my parents at school. That was my daily routine. My folks, they loved me, of course. I knew that, but they were always at work. Always. From morning till night, and sometimes even longer. They worked so we'd have everything we needed, and then some, but they hardly had any time left for me, for my troubles, for my antics. I grew up, essentially, on my own, like a weed by the roadside, and nobody really worried about where I'd end up. I was lost, as he said back then, and it was true. I didn't understand why I needed all these lessons, these books, these rules. It seemed to me like it was all just some game adults had invented to keep us kids busy with something boring and pointless. I could sit in class, stare out the window, count clouds, or just doodle in my notebook, and then wonder why I got another F. Most of the teachers just gave up on me. They saw me as a hopeless troublemaker who'd never amount to anything. But there was one who saw differently. That was our literature teacher, Mr. Harper. He was strict, yes, very strict. His voice could sound like thunder when he was displeased, and his gaze could pierce right through you. But at the same time, in his eyes, there was always some strange kindness, some depth that I couldn't decipher back then. He never yelled without a reason, never humiliated. He just looked, and in that gaze there was so much disappointment, hope, and understanding. One time, after another one of my stunts, when I'd disrupted the class, he asked me to stay behind. I was already bracing myself for another lecture, for a long, boring talk about how I should be. But he just sat down at his desk, adjusted his glasses, and looked at me. His gaze was soft, but at the same time very penetrating. He didn't raise his voice, didn't scold. He just said, and those words echoed in my head for a long time afterward, "You're not stupid, you're just lost." Those words sounded so quiet, but they cut into my memory like nothing else before. Nobody had ever told me that. Nobody had seen anything more in me than just a problematic teenager. It was as if he looked into my soul and saw something there that I myself didn't see or was simply afraid to see. He didn't try to change me. He simply acknowledged my essence, and that was something completely new to me. I didn't know what to say, just stood there looking at him, feeling something inside me begin to change, subtly but irreversibly. I didn't know what to say, just stood there looking at him, feeling something inside me begin to change, subtly but irreversibly. Mr. Harper didn't wait for an answer. He simply got up, walked over to the bookshelf that took up almost the entire wall of his office, and picked out a small, worn book. It had no bright cover, its pages were yellowed with age, and the spine was frayed. He held it out to me, and I took it, feeling its weight in my hand. This wasn't a school textbook, not one of those boring books we had to read. It was a book about adventures, about journeys, about finding oneself. "Read it," he said. "Just read it. If you don't like it, you don't have to return it." I looked at it skeptically then. Books for me were synonymous with boredom, something you had to do, not something you might want to do. But his words, his gaze, they had some special power. I took that book home and put it on my desk. It lay there for a few days. I kept putting it off, finding 1,000 reasons not to pick it up. But something drew me to it. Maybe it was his belief in me, his unusual approach. One evening, when the house was quiet and I didn't know what to do with myself, I finally opened it. And from the very first pages, I plunged into a world that had been completely unknown to me until then. This was the first book I read all the way through, not because I had to, but because I couldn't put it down. Every word, every line, every adventure, it all captivated me, transported me to another dimension. I read it at night under the covers with a flashlight. I read it during classes, hiding it under my desk. It was a real discovery. After that book, something changed. Something like respect for Mr. Harper emerged, and then affection. I started to see him not just as a strict teacher, but as a person who had opened up a whole world for me. I started listening to him in class, not just listening, but truly hearing. His words about literature, about life, about human destinies, they took on new meaning for me. He talked about how books aren't just words on paper, they're a reflection of the soul, a way to understand yourself and the world around you. And I started to believe him. I began to write essays. At first, it was hard. Words wouldn't flow onto the paper. Thoughts got tangled. But I remembered his words, "You're not stupid, you're just lost." And I tried to find my voice, my lostness, and pour it onto the page. I remember turning in my first essay, written not for a grade, but from the heart. I waited for his evaluation with an excitement I'd never felt before. When he handed back my notebook, I saw a big red A in the margin. It was my first A in literature, and it felt like the most important grade of my life. But more important than the grade were his words. He looked at me, and in his eyes was that same kindness, but this time it was filled with pride. He said, "Well done." Just one word, but it sounded to me like the loudest applause. For the first time, someone said, "Well done." It wasn't just recognition of my abilities, it was recognition of me as a person, as someone who could achieve something. It was a moment that changed everything. It was the beginning of my path, which he, without even knowing it, paved for me. And I was so grateful, though I didn't yet understand how deeply that gratitude would take root in my soul. And I was so grateful, though I didn't yet understand how deeply that gratitude would take root in my soul. After that A and his "well done," I started seeing the world differently. Literature became not just a subject, but a true passion, a way to understand myself and the world around me. I read everything I could get my hands on, discussed books with Mr. Harper after class, and he always found time to talk with me, answer my questions, share his thoughts. He wasn't just a teacher, he was my mentor, my guide into the world of knowledge and self-discovery. He taught me not only to read between the lines, but also to see depth in simple things, to understand human feelings, to empathize with characters, and most importantly, to find my own voice. School years flew by unnoticed, and then it was time to say goodbye. I remember graduation night, his words spoken to all of us, and the look he gave me. There was so much warmth and pride in it. I promised myself then that I would never forget him, that I would definitely visit him, tell him about my successes, thank him for everything. But life, it's like that. It carries you along like a swift river, and you don't even notice the years flying by. After school, life swept me away. College, new acquaintances, new challenges, new experiences. I enrolled in journalism, and I knew it was his influence. I started writing articles, reports, and I liked it. But there wasn't that time anymore to just drop by the school to talk with him. Then came work. First job, second, third. Each one demanded full dedication, took all my time and energy. I got caught up in daily life, in everyday worries and solving urgent problems. It seemed like every day was a continuous flow of things to do, and in that flow, there was no room for memories, for gratitude, for those who were important in my past. I knew he was still teaching. Sometimes I saw his name in the local newspaper when they wrote about school news, or heard from acquaintances that he was still working at the same high school, still teaching kids literature, still opening up the world of words for them. Sometimes I wanted to write. I even started writing letters, but then something stopped me. I'd think, "Oh, now's not the time. I'm busy. I'll write later." Or, "What will I say to him? Just thank you? That feels too small." I always put it off, always found some excuses, some reasons not to do it right then. I thought I'd still have time, that he'd live forever, that I could always go to him when I was ready, when I had something significant to show him, to prove that his efforts weren't in vain. I imagined our meeting, me telling him about my successes, about how his lessons helped me in life, how I used the voice he helped me find. I thought it would be the perfect moment, and I waited for it. But the perfect moment never came. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. And every time I thought of him, I felt a slight pang of conscience, but then I'd brush it off, convincing myself I'd still get around to it. I didn't know that time flies so fast, and that some things need to be done not when there's time, but while there's time. And that thought, it just hung in the air. But I ignored it, immersed in my own life. in my own affairs. And that thought, it just hung in the air, but I ignored it, immersed in my own life, in my own affairs. I was so consumed by my daily worries that the world around me seemed to blur, becoming just a backdrop for my own achievements and problems. I worked, built a career, started a family, and it seemed like everything was going according to plan, that I was moving forward towards my goals. But one morning, as I was scrolling through the news feed on my phone, looking for headlines that might become the subject of my next article, my gaze caught on a single notification. It was short, but its content hit me like a bolt from the blue. The headline was simple: "Distinguished educator passes away." I started reading, and my heart tightened. "Teacher to whom hundreds of students are grateful has died." Then came the name, Mr. Harper. My breath hitched. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my hands started to tremble. It couldn't be true. He was eternal. He was always there, at that school, with his books, with his calm voice. But the news was true. Below was a photograph. The same photograph that was on the school website, just slightly updated. It was him. The same gaze, grayer. Yes, his hair was completely white, more wrinkles around his eyes, but the same gaze. That same kind, penetrating gaze that once saw in me not just a problematic student, but a lost child who needed help. A sudden wave of shame and regret washed over me. It wasn't just sadness. It was something much deeper, something that pierced to the bone. I felt a hot flush spread across my face, even though I was alone in the room. Shame for having put it off for so long, for not having found the time to thank him, to tell him how important he had been in my life. Regret that it was now impossible. He was gone, and all my laters, all my somedays, they crumbled to dust. I remembered all those times I thought of him, when I wanted to write, when I intended to visit the school. Each of those moments now seemed like a lost opportunity, a precious chance I had simply thrown away. I closed my eyes, and scenes from the past flashed before me. I saw his face, heard his voice, felt his presence, as if he were standing right next to me. It was painful, unbearably painful. I felt guilty, as if I had betrayed him, betrayed his faith in me. He had given me so much, and I had given him nothing in return, not even the simplest word of gratitude. It was worse than any F I ever got in school. It was worse than any punishment. It was the realization that I had lost something irrevocably, and that this loss was my own fault. And that feeling, it was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. It demanded something from me, but I didn't yet know what. And that feeling, it was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. It demanded something from me, but I didn't yet know what. My thoughts, like a swarm of bees, buzzed around one thing: Mr. Harper. My brain refused to believe he was gone, but my heart had already accepted that bitter truth. Along with that truth, memories flooded back, as vivid as if it were yesterday. I remember him sitting at his desk, bent over my notebook, his hand with a red pen carefully correcting my mistakes. He didn't just cross things out. He neatly underlined, wrote comments in the margins, explained why it was this way and not another. He never did it with irritation, always with patience, with a desire to teach, not just to point out flaws. Every stroke of his pen was a lesson, every word a guiding light. I remembered him reading aloud, especially The Little Prince. His voice, calm, measured, filled the classroom with a special kind of magic. He didn't just read the words, he breathed life into them, transforming them into images, into emotions. I think that was the first time I truly felt what empathy was, what the beauty of words meant. He read about the rose, about the fox, about the stars, and every one of his words penetrated my soul, leaving its mark there. I saw how he himself experienced every phrase, how his eyes lit up when he reached particularly important moments. It wasn't just reading, it was an art that he passed on to us, his students. And I, that same disobedient student who used to not be able to sit still for 5 minutes, listened to him, holding my breath. And suddenly, like a flash, his words appeared. I remember him saying it once when we were talking about gratitude, about how important it is to appreciate those who do good for us. True gratitude is an act, not just words, he said then. I didn't give those words much thought at the time. It seemed to me that words were already a lot. But now, standing here, with empty hands, I realize the full depth of his wisdom. Words can be empty if there's no action behind them. My unspoken thank yous were exactly that. Empty. They carried no weight because they weren't backed by anything. The protagonist realizes he didn't even manage words. That was the worst part. I didn't just fail to act. I didn't even manage words. I didn't write, didn't call, didn't visit. I just stayed silent. And that silence now seemed like the most terrible reproach. I imagined him, perhaps waiting at least for some news from his former students, from those to whom he had given a piece of his soul. Maybe he thought of me, remembered those times when I was his student, when he saw potential in me. And me? I just disappeared from his life, like so many others. It wasn't just shameful, it was painful. I felt like a traitor, a person who didn't appreciate the gift they were given. And that realization, it was so strong that I knew I had to do something. I couldn't turn back time, couldn't change the past, but I could do something now, to somehow atone for my guilt, to somehow express what I had held inside for so long. This wasn't for him, he couldn't hear anymore, but it was for me, for my soul, which needed liberation from this burden. This wasn't for him, he couldn't hear anymore, but it was for me, for my soul, which needed liberation from this burden. With that thought, I decided I had to bring something to the funeral, something that would symbolize my gratitude, my repentance. The first thing that came to mind was flowers. I headed to the flower shop nearby. Walking in, I saw countless bouquets, luxurious roses, delicate lilies, vibrant gerberas. The saleswoman smiled kindly, asking what I was looking for. But I stood there, looking at all that colorful variety, and felt that all these bouquets seemed empty. They were beautiful, no doubt, but they lacked the meaning, the depth I wanted to convey. They were too ordinary, too formal. I wanted something more, something personal, something that could tell of my feelings, of my journey, of his impact. I thanked the saleswoman and left, having bought nothing. My thoughts were chaotic. What could I bring? Something material, something symbolic? I remembered how much he valued words, how he believed in the power of literature, and suddenly it hit me. Words. I could write words, not just thank you, but something more, something that would come from the depths of my soul. I went into an office supply store and bought some paper and a pen. Not just a regular notebook, but a few sheets of good, thick paper and a nice, heavy pen that felt good in my hand. I wanted it to be something special, something he might have appreciated. I returned home and sat down at my desk. Before me lay the blank sheets of paper, and I felt my heart beating faster. What exactly should I write? How could I express everything that had accumulated over the years? I didn't know what exactly. The words didn't come immediately. I sat there, staring at the white sheet, and felt a myriad of thoughts, memories, and emotions swirling in my head. I started recalling everything he had done for me, how he gave me that book, how he patiently explained complex things to me, how he believed in me when no one else did. I remembered his smile, his gaze, his voice. And then I just started writing. Without a plan, without a clear structure, just writing what came from the heart. I wrote about who I was and who he helped me become, about how his words changed my life, how he opened up the world of literature to me, a world that became my passion, my profession. I wrote about how I regretted not telling him sooner, about putting it off, about thinking there would be more time. I wrote about how often I thought of him, how his lessons echoed in my mind during the most important moments of my life. I didn't try to be perfect, didn't try to choose fancy phrases. I just wrote, "I never told you thank you, but I think of you often." These words were sincere, they were real, and they were mine. I wrote and felt as if with every word written, a burden, a weight, was lifting from my soul. It wasn't just writing, it was a confession, it was a farewell, it was the expression of the unexpressed. I wrote late into the night, and when I finished I felt exhausted, but at the same time, lighter, as if I had finally done what I should have done long ago. I wrote late into the night, and when I finished I felt exhausted, but at the same time, lighter, as if I had finally done what I should have done long ago. The next day was the day of the memorial service. The morning was gloomy, the sky covered with heavy gray clouds, and it matched my mood. I put on a dark suit, which I usually only wore for formal meetings, and took the envelope with the letter. It lay in my inner pocket, close to my heart, and I felt its weight, like something very important, something I had to carry through to the end. On the way to the cemetery, I saw many people walking in the same direction. Some of them were familiar to me, former teachers, classmates, parents of students. All of them walked with faces full of sadness, but also respect. At the cemetery, there were already many people. They stood near the grave, forming a dense circle. I tried to stay to the side, not drawing attention to myself. Most of them came with something, flowers they carefully placed on the fresh earth, words they whispered to each other, remembering Mr. Harper. Some read poems, written by him or dedicated to him. Their voices were trembling, but filled with love and gratitude. It was touching, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I saw how much he meant to these people, how much he left behind. I stood silently. My hands were empty, just like that first time I came here. But this time, in my pocket, was a letter. It wasn't just a few words. It was a piece of my soul, my unspoken thank you, that had finally found its way. I didn't read it aloud. I couldn't. My voice would have trembled, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. This was something personal, something between me and him. I waited for the crowd to thin out a bit, and then I approached the grave. Bouquets, notes, small souvenirs already lay on the headstone. I carefully took the letter from my pocket. Its edges were a little crumpled, but the words were clear and understandable. I placed it in a vase that stood next to the headstone, among the other flowers. Next to the letter, I placed a paper crane. I had made it that morning, remembering how Mr. Harper once told us about the Japanese legend of 1,000 cranes bringing happiness and longevity. I didn't know if he believed in it, but for me, it was a symbol of hope, a symbol that his memory would live on and that his lessons would not disappear without a trace. The crane was simple, made of white paper, but it was crafted with love and respect. I looked at it, at the letter, at the flowers, and felt something inside me change. It wasn't a complete release from the burden, but it was the first step. I did what I could. I expressed what I needed to express. And even though he could no longer hear, I believed that somewhere, in that other world, he knew. And even though he could no longer hear, I believed that somewhere, in that other world, he knew. After the service, as people slowly began to disperse, I stood there, looking at the grave, my thoughts miles away. I was lost in my memories, in my feelings, and didn't notice anything around me. Then, suddenly, someone touched my shoulder. I turned and saw a man standing beside me. He was about my age, and his face seemed familiar, though I couldn't quite place him at first. He smiled, and there was something in his smile that immediately took me back to the past. You're John, right?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Mike. We were in Mr. Harper's class together." "Oh, Mike, of course." He was my classmate. We sat at the same desk for a few years. He was a quiet, modest kid who always kept to himself. I remember he lived in a group home, and it wasn't easy for him. We weren't close friends, but we always supported each other. We shook hands, and in his eyes, I saw the same sense of loss I felt myself. We started talking first about Mr. Harper, about what he was like, about his lessons, about his impact on our lives. Mike told me how the teacher had helped him get settled after he left the group home. He said Mr. Harper didn't just give knowledge, he gave hope. He helped Mike find a job, introduced him to the right people, supported him during a difficult time. This was a revelation to me. I knew Mr. Harper was a good man, but I had no idea how deeply he influenced the lives of others. We both fell silent. The silence was filled with shared memories, shared sorrow, shared gratitude. It was the kind of silence that only those who have experienced something similar truly understand. Then, unexpectedly, we remembered some funny story from our school days, some prank we pulled in literature class, and we both laughed. It was the same laughter we had back then in our school years, light, carefree, full of youthful exuberance. It was strange, but there was nothing inappropriate about that laughter. On the contrary, it seemed to lighten the atmosphere, allowing us to feel a connection to the past, to that time when we were young and Mr. Harper was there. We talked for a while longer, recalling different moments, sharing our stories about Mr. Harper. I told him about the book he gave me, about how it changed my life. Mike told his own stories, about how the teacher helped him with his studies, how he believed in him when Mike doubted himself. It was as if we were putting together a puzzle, piecing together all the fragments of his life, his influence on us. And every piece was important. Each added something new, something valuable to the overall picture. We felt that Mr. Harper, even after his death, continued to unite us, continued to be the thread that connected our destinies. And it was an amazing feeling. After talking with Mike, I went home with a sense that something inside me had shifted. The burden on my soul hadn't completely vanished, but it felt lighter, as if a part of it had dissipated in that shared remembrance. I felt a need to reevaluate everything that had happened and understand what I could do next. My thoughts kept returning to Mr. Harper, to his lessons, to his words. I went into my old room, where some of my childhood belongings were still stored. I started going through old boxes, looking for something that might remind me of those times. And suddenly, at the very bottom of one of the boxes, I found it. An old notebook with my essays. My high school literature notebook, its cover yellowed and worn, its pages crumpled with time. I carefully opened it. On the first page was my handwriting, childish, clumsy, and next to it, his, Mr. Harper's, neat, calligraphic corrections. I started flipping through the pages, and every essay, every grade, every comment took me back to those times when I was a student, when he was my teacher. I read my childhood attempts at writing, my first steps into the world of words, and felt a slight smile on my face. And then, in the margins of one of the essays, I saw his handwriting. It was a short phrase, written in his characteristic, clear script, which at the time seemed like just another comment, but now took on a completely different meaning. Don't be afraid to write. You have a voice. These words, written many years ago, resonated in my head as clearly as if he had just spoken them to me. Don't be afraid to write. You have a voice. It wasn't just encouragement. It was his message to me, his belief in my potential. He saw something in me that I didn't see myself, and he helped me find that voice. And now, with him gone, these words took on special weight. This became the impetus. I realized I had to do something. Not just write a letter that no one would read, but do something more. Something that could honor his memory, something that could continue his legacy. I decided to write an essay about him, not just an obituary, but a true story about the man who changed my life, about the teacher who was more than just a teacher. I wanted to tell about his influence, about his wisdom, about his kindness. I wanted other people to know about him, about what he was like, and about how important it is to appreciate those who leave a mark on our lives. I sat down at the computer and started writing. The words flowed by themselves, as if he himself were dictating them to me. I wrote about my school years, about that book, about his lessons, about how he helped me find my voice. I wrote about how I regretted not thanking him in time, about putting it off, about thinking there would be more time. It was difficult, but at the same time, liberating. I felt that with every word written, I was paying tribute to him, expressing my gratitude that had been locked inside me for so long. I felt that with every word written, I was paying tribute to him, expressing my gratitude that had been locked inside me for so long. When the essay was ready, I reread it several times, polishing every phrase, every word, to make it as sincere and poignant as possible. I wanted it to be worthy of his memory. Then I sent it to the local newspaper where I once worked and where I still had contacts. I wasn't sure if they would print it, but I hoped. It was my way of saying thank you, not only to him, but to the world, so that others could learn from my mistakes. A few days later, I got a call from the newspaper. The editor said the essay was very moving and they decided to print it. I felt a huge sense of relief and joy. The article was published in the local newspaper. The headline was simple, but very fitting: "My teacher and my chance." That was exactly what I wanted to say. He was my teacher, and he gave me a chance to find myself, a chance to use my voice. After publication, something amazing began. People started sharing their own stories. Letters and phone calls began pouring into the newspaper's office. People wrote about Mr. Harper, about how he influenced their lives, how he helped them in difficult moments. Former students, colleagues, parents, everyone shared their memories, their words of gratitude. Someone recalled his lessons, someone his advice, someone just his kind smile. It was as if my essay had opened the floodgates, and all those unspoken words, all those hidden feelings, burst forth. A living thread connecting dozens of people was born in memory. It was incredible. Mr. Harper, even after his death, continued to unite people. His memory became not just a remembrance for a few individuals, but a living thread that connected dozens and perhaps even hundreds of people. People who had never spoken before now found common ground, shared their stories, their emotions. It was as if he had created an invisible network of gratitude, which was now expanding and strengthening. I read all those letters, listened to all those stories, and felt my heart fill with warmth. I realized that my story wasn't just my story. It was a story about gratitude, about how important it is to appreciate those who do good for us, and about how important it is to express that gratitude in time. It was a lesson he continued to teach me, even after he was gone, and I was immensely grateful for that lesson, which changed my life forever. And I was immensely grateful for that lesson, which changed my life forever. A year passed. A year since that day I stood by his grave with empty hands. A year since that day I realized the full depth of my silence and my regret. A lot had changed in that year. I continued to write, but now my words were filled with a different meaning, a different depth. I became more attentive to the people around me, more open to expressing my feelings, bolder in my gratitude. I decided to return to the grave. This time, I didn't go there with a feeling of shame or emptiness. I went with a sense of peace and gratitude. In my hands, there were no flowers, no expensive gifts. This time, I brought a pen and paper. It was symbolic. It was what he had given me, and what I could now give him in return. It was a continuation of our conversation, our connection. I approached the grave. It was well maintained. Fresh flowers lay on it. Someone had left a small stone, as is done in some traditions, as a sign of remembrance. I carefully placed the pen and paper on the headstone, next to the other items. These were simple objects, but for me, they held immense meaning. They symbolized that his lessons had not vanished without a trace, that his influence continued to live on, in my words, in my creativity. As I placed them on the headstone, I quietly whispered, as if he could hear me, "You would have liked this." I imagined him smiling, his eyes lighting up with that same kindness I remembered. I sat down next to the grave, on a small bench, and sat for a long time. I didn't feel sadness, didn't feel regret. I felt peace. Peace from having done what I needed to do. Peace from finally expressing my gratitude, even if it was belated. And I felt lighter. Much lighter. The burden that had weighed on me for so long was finally gone. I understood that gratitude isn't just about the person you're thanking, but also about the person who's doing the thanking. It's liberating. And I felt lighter, much lighter. The burden that had weighed on me for so long was finally gone. Sitting there, by his grave, I understood that this wasn't just the end of one story, it was the beginning of a new understanding. I realized that words are important. Yes, very important. They can express feelings, convey emotions, connect people. But action is even more important. Words without action are like empty vessels that cannot hold true meaning. My silence, my procrastination, it was just that, empty. It expressed nothing but my negligence. Sometimes we stay silent out of respect. Out of respect for a person, for their authority, for their wisdom. We think our words would be superfluous, that they already understand everything. Or we're afraid that our words won't be good enough, deep enough, to express the full extent of our feelings. But silence isn't always heard by the other person. Silence can be misinterpreted. It can be perceived as indifference, as forgetfulness, as a lack of gratitude. And that can be painful for the one who is waiting for those words, for that action. The moral I took from this story was simple yet profound. You need to say thank you in time, while the recipient can still hear. While they can feel the warmth of your words, see the sincerity in your eyes. While there's still time, don't put it off. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment might never come. Life is fleeting, and we never know how much time we have, how much time those we cherish have. I didn't know what to put on the grave. Back then, a year ago, I was looking for something material, something tangible, that could symbolize my gratitude. But now I understood that what I needed to put there was a word. Just one word. Thank you. That word, spoken in time, could have changed everything. It could have brought joy. It could have confirmed that his work wasn't in vain, that his efforts were appreciated. It would have been the best gift, the best tribute to his memory. And now that I realized this, I felt that I had finally found peace. I couldn't turn back time, but I could live on, remembering this lesson and applying it in my life, saying thank you in time while I still have the chance.